All right, I am here today to talk about what I call extreme mentorship, or how to be a 100x engineer. So I'm sure that you're familiar with the concept of a 10x engineer. A 10x engineer is an individual contributor who somehow produces 10 times the code, works 10 times as fast, delivers 10 times the results, right? But that concept of a 10x engineer is all about individualism. It's all about that one person. I don't think that that's a valuable way to look at engineering. I think that engineering is something that we do together. And I think that it is more valuable to look at the concept of becoming a 100x engineer through extreme mentorship. So what I mean by a 100x engineer is that when I look at mentorship, I consider the work of the people that I mentor to be my work, right? A portion of their work is my work. And it is my work forever. So if I have an apprentice, if I have someone that's working for me that I am mentoring for a long period of time, 10% of their work is my work for the end of time. Until the end of time, that work gets to count as my work, right? When they go on to teach somebody else, when they mentor a new apprentice, a portion of that work is my work. And when that person goes on to teach someone new, a portion of their work is my work, right? What I'm describing here is a pyramid scheme. It is multi-level marketing. I am the upstream, and everybody that I teach, everyone that they teach, everyone that those people teach, right? All of that work is part of my work. And that is how you become a 100x engineer. There is no other way to produce this kind of work except through extreme mentorship. So first things first here, extreme mentorship is not about being an onboarding buddy. An onboarding buddy is somebody who helps you in those first couple of weeks, makes sure that you have all the right permissions, makes sure that you're in the right meetings, makes sure that you're in the right Slack groups, answers those first couple of questions, right? They're there for a couple of weeks. Extreme mentorship is not about being an onboarding buddy. Extreme mentorship is a months or years long commitment. Extreme mentorship requires a substantial investment of your time, okay? Your ADA intern was promised 4 to 6 weeks of your time every week. Your manager knows that. Your intern knows that. 4 to 6 hours every single week. The first few weeks that you have your ADA intern are typically going to require even more time than that. When I take on a new apprentice, when I have a new intern, during those first few weeks, I typically spend either the entire day with my apprentice, or if that's not possible, I do 3 daily meetings. First thing, middle of the day, end of the day, right? 3 times a day, I am checking in to understand what my intern or my apprentice is doing. This is a substantial investment of your time. Like any investment, we want to front load that as much as possible. We want to get that in at the very beginning of this internship, so there's time for that investment to actually grow, right? Agreeing to take on an apprentice is a huge commitment. This is not for the faint of heart. This is not something that you do because your manager asked you and you just said yes, right? This is a huge commitment, and you have to make sure that you are committed to actually seeing this through from start to finish. I can do approximately 2 apprenticeships per year, and that's it. I can take on 2 apprentices. This is so much work. When I take on a new apprentice, in those first 6 weeks, I scale back my own personal commitments, right? I scale back some of the plans that I have outside of work because having an apprentice is really tiring. Doing this work correctly tires me out, and at the end of the day, I don't want to talk to anybody else. So I can take 2 apprentices a year, and that's it. And in those first couple of weeks, I know that I'm going to be really tired. Your job as a mentor is to teach your apprentice how to do this job. Your apprentice has experience writing code in a classroom, which is almost completely unrelated from writing code in industry in a professional setting. So your job is to teach your apprentice how we do this job as professionals, which means that you need to teach your apprentice how to focus on doing one thing at a time, right? They will not do that on their own. They will try to do everything at once. So you have to teach them how to focus on one task on it at a time, how to create an atomic commit about a single idea, right? The other thing is that your apprentice thinks that you know how to do everything that's put in front of you, every single thing. They think that you just know how to do it, right? That is not true. And you need to show them that that's not true. You need to show them how to do the job, how to figure out what they're going to do next, how they're going to solve those puzzles. They don't have experience doing this job professionally. You have to teach them how to do that. You have to ensure that your apprentice has a functioning development environment with a fast feedback loop. If you don't do this, I promise that your apprentice is going to come up with something absolutely wild. And I have a ton of examples. These examples are from all sorts of interns, not just ADA interns, but computer science interns as well. A lot of them are questions that I have answered on Sage. So we know that these are computer science interns who aren't getting the right support. They don't have functioning development environments. Let me give you some examples. I've seen an example where an engineer created code reviews just to run Coverlay, just to get a coverage report, right? So they're committing the work, they're creating the code review, they're waiting for the full build for that Coverlay report just to see what the coverage for their code is, right? For their new tests. Because they don't know how to do that faster. So that would be one example of not having a functioning development environment. At Amazon, I have seen engineers trying to run git clone instead of creating a Brazil workspace using Brazil commands, right? That is a sign that they don't have a functioning development environment. They're lost. If someone is trying to git clone at Amazon, they're lost. I've seen new engineers who are working in native AWS, working on Lambda or on ECS, who don't have RDE or SAM toolkit set up. So they don't have a way to test their infrastructure as code, those cloud formation, those CDK changes. If you don't have a way to test something, you don't have a functioning development environment, right? I've also seen engineers who run BB test for every single change that they make because their IntelliJ is not configured correctly to be able to run unit tests, right? So you have to ensure that your apprentice has a functioning development environment with a fast feedback loop. I am looking for a feedback loop on the order of seconds, right? 5 seconds, 15 seconds. Anything that's longer than 5 minutes, unless we are talking about a full deployment of an ECS service, right? If there's some sort of exception like that, that's going to take longer, but anything longer than 5 minutes is very likely broken. So you need to fix that. You need to make sure that your apprentice has that functioning development environment, has that fast feedback loop, and knows how to test their changes. All right. You have to break down work into appropriately sized chunks. Okay. Your intern does not know how to do this. And if you don't help them with this, I can guarantee you, I will bet money that they will try to complete their entire project in a single code review, right? Everything's going to try to happen in one code review at the very end of internship, and it's not going to work. So they need your help to break down that work into appropriately sized chunks. They can't do this on their own yet, okay? I'll give you an example. Let's say that you've got a project that involves a Lambda function that writes to a DynamoDB table, right? That's it. I don't know what it does, but a Lambda, a DynamoDB. If you do not break this out into pieces, all of that's going to happen in one code review. The CDK changes, the business logic inside that Lambda, all of it's going to happen in one code review, and it's not going to work. Thinking about that work, Lambda, a DynamoDB table, to me, one unit of work is just creating the DynamoDB table. That's it, right? It's 10 tight lines of CDK or CloudFormation, relatively straightforward. That is an entire unit of work. They can test that work, they can deploy it and see the new table get stood up in their AWS account. So that itself is a unit of work. They will not think that that's a unit of work. They do not understand that that's the right size. So they're going to try to do more than that at once. You have to teach them that. We are always looking for the smallest, logical, testable unit of work, the smallest logical testable unit of work, and they need your help identifying that. You should know exactly how you would do everything that you ask your apprentice to do. Everything. You should know exactly how you would do it. If you don't know how to do the thing you're asking the apprentice to do, you're going to have a hard time spotting when your apprentice has gone astray, when they've lost the thread, when they're out in the weeds, when they need help, right? You're not going to be able to see that because you're not going to know exactly what it is they're doing. If you don't know exactly how to do what you're asking the apprentice to do, then you are not going to be able to vet the documentation that you're giving them. So if you hand someone documentation and they're brand new, they're going to think that the documentation is good, that it's correct, right? If you haven't thought about how you would do the work yourself, you can't vet that documentation to make sure that it's the right documentation, that it's the right caliber of documentation for someone else to follow. So you need to know exactly what you're asking your apprentice to do. This is not the time for you to try switching from CloudFormation to the CDK and ask your intern to make a prototype of that. If your team doesn't write CDK already, your intern is not going to figure it out for you, okay? So you have to know exactly how you would do everything that you ask your apprentice to do. You have to know exactly what your intern is working on at any moment in time. All day long, I know exactly what my apprentices are doing down to the specific task that they are working on. If you don't know what your intern is working on, then you don't know if they've gotten lost in the weeds or they've been blocked for too long on a task, right? In general, I assign work to my interns or my apprentices in about 2 to 4 hour chunks of time. So I give them a task that I think should take about 2 to 4 hours. At the end of that window, I check in to make sure that we're on track, to make sure that they're making progress, that they've either completed that thing or they're close to completing that thing. About 2 to 4 hours, right? So going back to that three meetings a day strategy, when we check in, beginning, middle, and end of the day, that means that I am checking in on either side of those 4 hour windows to make sure that they are on task, on track for the thing that I've asked them to do, that they're not blocked. I am a huge stickler about ticket updates, about sim updates. I want my apprentice to record everything that they do in sim, everything that they try, every sage answer that they reference, every piece of documentation that they read, everything. This is how I keep track of what they're doing. This is how I can tell if they are on track or they've lost the thread, if they're blocked on something. I see those sim updates come through and I know exactly what they are doing and whether or not it's the thing that I want them to be doing, right? All day I know exactly what my intern is working on. Do not give your apprentice more time, right? I give my apprentices the same amount of time that I think it would take me to do a task. And that's it. At the end of that time window, if it's not done, I'm going to check in and I'm going to course correct. Okay? If someone is taking longer than I expect on a task, very likely it's because they are lost or they are stuck. If you give them more time, they will not know what to do with that time. They will just continue to be stuck, right? So do not give more time. When enough time has elapsed that you feel like this thing should be done, intervene, right? Needing more time is very likely a sign that your apprentice is lost and needs your help. Read code to your apprentice. My guess is that you've never done this before, but it is one of the most valuable things that you can do. Reading code to your apprentice is one of the fastest ways to teach a new language. So when I'm working with someone new in a language that maybe they don't have a ton of familiarity with, I will read a file from top to bottom, every single line of the code. Okay? I've been doing this job for 5 years, and my own mentor still sometimes reads code to me. If I'm working in a new language, or if we're really deep into something in Java that I'm not super familiar with yet because it's so far in the weeds, my mentor will read code to me so that I can understand exactly what that code is doing. On the flip side, ask your apprentice to read code to you. So there's no better way to gauge comprehension than to have someone else read something to you and tell you what it does, right? So ask your apprentice to read code to you. Same thing, my own mentor makes me read code to him so that he understands what I understand and he can help fill in the gaps of the pieces that aren't making sense to me yet, right? Sometimes I call my mentor and I say, can you just listen to me read this, right? And he will sit there for even 5 or 10 minutes, listen to me read code, and then tell me, yeah, you got it. You totally understood that. Or he'll point out the nuances to say, that was super close, but actually here's what's happening in here, right? So ask your apprentice to read code to you so that you can gauge their understanding and help course correct when they don't quite understand something correctly. Read documentation to your apprentice. Okay? Reading documentation is a skill that takes practice. When you read documentation to your apprentice, it means that you are verifying that the documentation makes sense. It's up to date. It's logical. It's easy to follow. It starts at step 1 and not at step 2, right? A lot of documentation starts at step 2. So identify when something starts at step 2 and provide step 1 if you need to your apprentice. When you read documentation to your apprentice, you can pick what parts to linger on and what parts to skip past. So what I mean by that is I was working with an apprentice on DynamoDB. The DynamoDB documentation, in the very beginning of it, starts with information about availability zones, right? Now, you know what an availability zone is because you work in AWS. But basically, high level, it's just that a single data center has more than one building to it, right? If I wasn't there to help my apprentice read that documentation, they would get stuck on that one thing to say, I don't know what this is. Should I stop and read about availability zones to understand this documentation? Can I skip over it? When I read documentation to my apprentice, I can give them that one quick high-level sentence. It's just a bunch of different buildings. And then we can move on to the important stuff, the stuff that actually applies to what they're working on, right? So you get to decide what parts you're going to linger on, what parts to skip past, where you want to spend your time in that documentation, and you're showing your intern how you read documentation. On the flip side, ask your apprentice to read documentation to you. Okay? Again, there is no better way to judge comprehension than having someone read something and then explain to you what it means. So when I do this, I will have an apprentice read a single paragraph out loud, literally read it verbatim, and then I will have them tell me what they think it means, right? Explain that to me in their own words. This gives me an opportunity to say, yeah, you got it, that's exactly right, you completely understood this thing, or to fill in the gaps if something is missing, or to correct something if they're understanding it incorrectly, right? No better way to gauge comprehension than to ask your apprentice to read that documentation to you. Schedule hangout time to work quietly near each other. So when we work in the office as a team, right, we've got our desks, they're all next to each other, and I can just glance over and see what an apprentice is doing. That's a lot harder when we're all remote. So what I do working remotely is that I ask my apprentice to screen share with me. We hop on a video call, I ask them to screen share. I put their screen share on my laptop. I put my own work on my big monitor. We keep the video off, we stay muted, but it allows me basically to see what they're doing and decide when I want to interject, when I want to intervene, when I want to course correct, right? But I'm still doing my own work, okay? This gives me insight into exactly what my apprentice is doing, how they work, what they are getting stuck on, where they are spending their time, and it allows me to stop and intervene, give them the answer if it's just time for them to get the answer and move on, or allow them to struggle for a while on purpose, right? Let them sit with something. Sometimes I'll even unmute and just say, hey, I see that you're stuck. I'm pretty sure that you're going to be able to figure this out, so I'm leaving you alone for right now, right? And then maybe I'll give it 5, 10, 15 minutes. And if they're still stuck and I don't think it's a good use of their time, then I'll intervene, right? Having an open video call lowers the bar for asking questions. If they get stuck, they just unmute. They're like, hey, Alyssa, could I get help with this thing, right? They don't have to ping you and call you. You're already on a call, okay? So just schedule time to hang out and work quietly together. Okay, stop and fix. So this concept is about seeing stuff that your intern is doing, seeing stuff in their development environment that is hampering them. And if those things are things that you would not tolerate for yourself, for your own work environment, stop and fix them, okay? Now, I know that this is not happening for the most part because these interns come to my office hours, and when they come to my office hours, they bring me problems that no one else has stopped and fixed, okay? I'll give you a specific example. One example is a lot of IDEs, like IntelliJ, comes configured with some code formatting opinions. And sometimes interns will save a file, and then everything in the file moves around. The import order changes, white space changes. They wind up with this big diff. They don't understand why it happened. So they don't know how to fix it. They don't understand that it's IntelliJ taking over, that it's a configuration setting that they can change, right? So if your intern is running into that, where it's like every time they save, imports go all over the place. If you see that in their code review diffs, you're like, why are you reordering all of these imports? Stop and fix. Get them on a call and say, hey, I think your configurations are not set up correctly. Let's fix that, okay? Don't let your intern come to my office hour with these kinds of problems, right? Intervene, stop and fix as you run into things. Always be looking for opportunities to help your apprentice speed up, okay? Apprentices come up with the slowest ways to do things, right? Going back to that earlier example about creating a code review to run Coverly to get a coverage report, they will find the slowest way. They will invent new slow ways, okay? Look for opportunities to speed your apprentice up. One thing I've seen people do, like I said, is run that full Brazil build instead of running individual tests in their IDE. Fix that, okay? Is your intern typing out super long commands, or are they keeping commands in some sort of like notes document and then copying and pasting those things because they don't know how to use backsearch in their terminal, or they don't have aliases set up where necessary? Teach them how to use backsearch. Teach them how to set up aliases, right? Often when folks are new in IntelliJ, when they want to find a file, they go look at the left-hand side at that file tree and they scroll through it and they open up the individual directories one click at a time, right? Teach them shift, teach them Command-O, teach them how to get around in IntelliJ using those key bindings, the way that you do that. Look for those opportunities to speed them up. Often I see apprentices in terminal, they've got a long command that they pasted in and now they don't want to run it, so they hit the backspace key over and over and over and over and over. Stop them, right? It's Command-C, gives them a brand new fresh line. Don't let them waste their time that way. They know that it can be done faster, but they don't know how to figure that out. So just teach them how to speed up, okay? Always make your apprentice drive. This has gotten a lot easier with remote pairing, right? Because it used to be that we would have mentors who would take the keyboard out of their intern's hand. Don't ever do that, right? But when we're working remotely, it's a lot easier. I just make them screen share with me and then I dictate to them. So always make your apprentice drive. People learn better by doing stuff themselves, okay? Put them in control. But keep in mind that this can be really daunting. Having someone watch every single thing that you're doing and dictate to you it's hard. It's just really hard. And it can be really embarrassing when you don't understand what's being asked for, when you don't know what to do next, right? So make sure that you're being gentle, that you're giving them space to not understand you, to ask you to repeat yourself, right? It is very exhausting to have your apprentice drive and to do the dictating, but make sure that they're the ones doing the work, that it's their hands on the keyboard, okay? If you must drive, my first thing is, if you must drive, is that because you got tired? Okay. When I get tired of dictating, that's when I want to take the keyboard away from someone and I just want to do it myself, right? If you're tired, just take a break. But if you absolutely must drive, make sure that you speak your hotkeys out loud, okay? I use IntelliJ almost entirely by key bindings, right? I have almost the entire thing just memorized in my fingertips. Your apprentice can't keep up with you when you're using key bindings. They can't see what you're typing. They can't see your mouse moving around because you're not moving your mouse around, right? So speak your hotkeys, right? I'm always saying, oh, Command O to open up class search, Shift to open up the all search, Command K in my terminal to clear my screen, right? I speak all of my key bindings out loud when I am driving. But again, if you're tired, it's okay to take a break and to say, you know what, I think we should come back to this tomorrow. Be transparent when you don't know the answer. One of the most revelatory experiences that I ever had was when I told my mentor, who I trusted very, very deeply, I told him that I did not understand the difference between extends and implements in Java, right? And I thought that he would just explain it to me off the top of his head. Instead, what he said was, I often get them backwards. Let's go read the documentation together. And then he pulled up the Oracle documentation. And then we read the Java 8 docs together, okay? I did not know that it was okay to not know, right? Beginners think that you know everything, that you know how to do everything that's put in front of you. So show them when you don't. The best engineers that I work with are only good at what they do because they know how to figure things out. It's not that they know everything, it's that they know how to figure things out. So teach your intern that you don't know everything, you just know how to figure things out. Focus on demonstrating how you know what you know. When I was very early in my career, I worked with an SDA3, Johnny Bernardi, really phenomenal engineer, and a really phenomenal mentor. And one of the things that he would do for me is that when I asked a question, he would give me his research breadcrumbs, okay? So he would take me from my question through every single step, every search, whether that's on Google or internal search, wiki, code browser, every single search that he did, every single link that he then opened from there to say, okay, I've got this first search term. From there, here are the 3 things that I opened that I thought might have an answer. So here are my new tabs. This took me to there. This took me to here. This is what I think is the most likely answer. And if that doesn't work, this is what I'm going to try next, right? He would show me those breadcrumbs. So demonstrate how you know what you know. Spending time in code browser with your intern, just showing them how you find similar code to what you're working on to use as a reference. Like that is some of the best one of the best investments that you can make is demonstrating how you know what you know. Remind your apprentice to stop and take notes after every meeting. Apprentices think that they need to go fast, right? So they are just trying to get to the next task, do the next thing, right? We have to teach them how to slow down. There's a saying in mountaineering, slow down to speed up, right? When we want to go fast, we go slow first. So teach your apprentice to stop and take notes. Writing up really high quality notes, keeping a work log is part of this job. But they will not do that on their own unless you tell them that they have to take the time to do it, that is part of the job. They have to do that during their work hours. Stop and take those notes, okay? Asking my apprentice to take notes is part of how I get time to myself. I'm like, we spent an hour together, I explained some things, I want you to spend an hour writing that up for yourself for the future, and now I can go work on something by myself. I set the bar really high here, so I think it's okay to say, listen, I'm happy to clarify things for you, but I don't want to answer the same question twice. So if you bring me a question that you've already asked me, I'm going to ask you what I said last time. I'm going to ask you what we did last time to resolve that problem. If you have questions about it, if you can tell me what we did and you have questions, I'm happy to answer those questions, to clarify things, to re-explain things. But if you say you don't remember or you don't have notes, I'm going to feel very frustrated, right? So I say that to my apprentices. I need you to stop and take notes so that when it happens again, you can reference your notes first before coming to me. Beware of saying, you don't need to understand that, okay? When you say you don't need to understand that, you rob your apprentice of information that you yourself have. The only time that you can say you don't need to understand that is if you yourself don't understand it and genuinely don't need to, right? I have an apprentice right now. She brought something up and I said, oh, you don't need to understand that. And she was like, oh, you're not supposed to say that to me. And I was like, oh, that's true. I'm not supposed to say that. But I actually didn't know the thing that she was asking about and had never needed to know it. And so we weren't going to focus on it in that moment, right? But if you know something, don't say you don't need to understand that. Explain that thing. Beware of saying we just need to move on. Usually, mentors say we just need to move on when something is broken and they don't want to take the time to fix it, right? So often this is said when something about a development environment is not working and you're struggling to resolve it and you're like, man, we just need to get this code review out. Like, I just need to skip over this right now. When you say we just need to move on, without actually figuring out how to solve the problem, you're hamstringing your apprentice. Okay? You're putting your apprentice in a situation where now something does not work and it's going to continue to not work, potentially forever. So avoid saying we just need to move on. Make sure that you are resolving whatever is the underlying issue there. Okay? Anytime that you say we just need to move on, it's a sign that your intern's life is about to get harder than it needs to be. Beware of saying, if you have questions, just ask. Okay? Oftentimes, apprentices don't know what they don't know. So they don't know how to ask the question. Or maybe they've been so stuck for so long that they're embarrassed to say it, right? So don't say, if you have questions, just ask. This saying, if you have questions, just ask, is not a replacement for your hands-on mentorship, right? You're putting the burden on the apprentice to figure out how to ask the question, and they might not be able to do that. Okay? Sometimes you have to solicit questions from your intern. So I've got some strategies for that. If you feel like I gotta figure out how to get this person to ask me a question, let me give you this one, okay? Here's my question. How are you doing today? How are you doing today, right? Every morning, I start with that. How are you doing today? I send it at like 9:30 to my apprentice every day. That's my opener. That's how I get the questions out. How are you doing today? Can you walk me through what you're working on this morning? How are you feeling about this task? Would you like someone to pair with you for a bit while you're getting started on this new task? Is there anything about what you're working on that you feel daunted by? Would talking about it with someone help you break down that work into manageable components, right? So instead of saying, if you have questions, just ask. Ask those opening questions so that the person that you're working with can figure out what their in is. What is their hook? How are they going to ask you their question? How are you doing today? Okay. No one has ever asked you a question that they didn't think made at least some sense. Nobody has ever asked you a question that did not make at least some sense to them, okay? But I promise you that they will ask you questions that do not make sense to you. Make sense to them, does not make sense to you. When you hear a question that does not immediately make sense, simmer on it, okay? Spend some time with it. Don't say to your intern, what? Don't say to your intern, that doesn't make sense, okay? When I hear a question that doesn't make sense, the first thing that I say is, let me think about that for a second. And then in my brain, I am trying to connect the dots. I am trying to figure out, where is this question coming from? What is this related to? Why does this make sense to the person who's asking it, but not making sense to me yet, okay? So that first sentence, let me think about it for a second. And the second sentence is, tell me more about your question, right? I'm not telling them that it doesn't make sense. I'm just asking for more information. Tell me more about your question. Again, trying to figure out how I'm going to connect the dots from what they asked me to what they actually meant to ask me, all right? So no one has ever asked you a question that didn't make at least some sense to them. Tell me more about your question. The way that you respond to a question directly impacts whether or not you get questions in the future. So if you tell someone that doesn't make sense, they're not going to ask you questions again, right? So tell them, let me think about it. Ask them to tell you more, okay? Practice reading logs and error messages with your apprentice. Reading logs and error messages takes practice. When I was an intern, my SDA3 Brandon could identify my problem by glancing at my screen from 10 feet away, right? He would like literally just swivel around in his chair and then he could shout out the answer. And I always asked him, I was like, how are you doing that? Like, how can you tell from that far? It's like, it's just practice, okay? It's just practice. I've seen a lot of error messages. It's just practice, right? Now that I've been doing this job for 5 years, I can do that. I can look at your error message from 10 feet away and I know what the problem is. We got to teach that, though, to people. You have to teach how to read error messages to beginners. So when I'm working with a beginner, I always ask them to tell me which line of the error message is the important line. Okay. The first thing that they will tell you is build failed. They will point out the build failed line and they will tell you that's the important line, right? Well, that's not the important line. That's the outcome, but that doesn't actually tell us anything about what went wrong. The next thing they're going to find is some random line somewhere else in the error or in the log output, right? You got to tell them, you have to help them find the actual thing that counts, right? So I always ask them, can you tell me which line you think is the important line? If they can find that correct line, ask them what they think it means. Again, we're just gauging comprehension. So they found the right line. Do they understand it, right? If they don't understand it, fill in the gaps. Explain to them what that error message means, right? But those are two super important practices for getting beginners more comfortable reading logs and error messages. What's the important line? What does that line mean? All right, this is a concept here. Watch one, do one, teach one. This is a super important fundamental of teaching, right? We are always looking for opportunities for repetition. I teach mountaineering in my free time, and I do this with my mountaineering students, right? I show them one time, I ask them to do it and show me, and then I ask them to teach someone else. That repetition is how we solidify understanding, and it's also how I gauge comprehension. They'll say they understand when they watch it once, right? Sometimes they'll say they understand if they do it once immediately after watching it. But when you ask them to teach it to someone else, or you ask them to do it that third time, that's when we see if the comprehension is actually there, right? So watch one, do one, teach one. Look for opportunities for repetition in your space. Keep a careful eye on code reviews, okay? First of all, your intern has to follow your team's standard code review process, okay? Your intern is not out on some development branch forever. Your intern is not just in their own package pushing to mainline without code review. They have to be going through code reviews. In code review, you need to be super, super careful about how you review that code. So when someone is brand new, it can be really tempting to leave 1,000 comments on their code, right? There was one point where I was brand new in a space and my teammates left 30 comments on a single file, okay? That is a horrible experience. I went home in tears. I did not speak to anyone on my team for 2 weeks. And then I found another opportunity and I left the team, okay? So don't leave 1,000 comments on a code review. In each code review, think about what 2 or 3 concepts you want to focus on and focus only on those. It is okay to let a couple of things slide in early code reviews and then come back and teach those skills a little bit later, right? 2 or 3 key ideas and then add new ideas in subsequent code reviews. Always provide documentation to back up your opinions. So what I mean by that is that if you know there's a correct way to do something, provide the documentation that proves it, okay? I was recently doing a code review for a newer SDE1 who doesn't write a lot of Java, and his class variables and his instance variables were all over the place. There was no order to them. There was no, like, just completely random, right? White space, completely amok. I know that there's a canonical order to those things. And I also know that that canonical order is documented somewhere. And so I went and I got the actual Oracle documentation about what order things are supposed to be in inside a Java file. And I provided that to him, okay? Always provide documentation to back up your opinions. Be super prompt. When your intern publishes a code review, they are so anxious because all of a sudden they have put their work out there in public and everybody can see it. They are so anxious. So be super prompt about getting to it so they don't have to be anxious for a really long period of time, right? The longer that it takes you to review it, the worse they think that their work is. They don't understand that you're doing something else, right? They just think that either their work is terrible or you don't care, okay? So be super prompt. Your apprentice is blocked while that code review is sitting there waiting for code review feedback. And we don't want apprentices to start working on the next idea because if the first idea is fundamentally flawed, we don't want more work to happen on top of it, right? So super prompt on code reviews with your apprentices when they go out, make them your first priority. Lastly, guide the rest of your team in being careful reviewers, okay? If we don't all work together, then if you're a super careful reviewer and you're focusing on your 2 to 3 concepts, but someone else comes in and leaves those 30 comments on every single line, right? Horrible experience. So guide everybody else. Sometimes if I see a code review come through and I'm like, oh gosh, there's a lot of stuff in there. Sometimes I will ping the rest of my team and I'll say, hey guys, I'm going to take this one so that I can control the narrative of that code review for my apprentice, okay? So it's okay if you ask other people to just leave this code review alone. Keep an eye on code reviews. Be nitpicky, but explain yourself. When I was an intern, my team was super nitpicky in my code reviews, right? I got a comment on no new line at the end of file, unnecessary white space changes, white space on a new line where it shouldn't be, commit messages not following a standard pattern, every single thing, right? All of these little nits. And it felt so overwhelming. It made me feel so stupid. And it just felt really nitpicky. It felt like the whole team was just there to like rip apart my work, right? The thing is, all of those things are correct, right? A file needs to have a new line at the end of it. We don't commit unnecessary white space changes. We don't commit empty white space on a line, right? We don't do those things. But there are reasons for every single one of those things, right? We need to have a new line at the end of a file because the new line character is part of the last line. And so if we don't have a new line, then when we go to add more code to this file, we're going to modify that last line, even though technically we didn't really touch it, right? And so it creates a polluted Git history if we don't have new lines at the end of our files. But you have to explain that. If I'm going to tell someone, hey, you have to do this thing, you have to do it my way, I will always explain exactly why so that it makes sense, that it's not nitpicking. Okay, there is a good reason why I'm insisting that you do it that way. I am nitpicky because I know that eventually my apprentice is going to go work for someone else. And when they do, I want that person to be incredibly impressed, right? I want whoever my apprentice works for next to just be like, dang, this is a really good engineer. So I'm going to be super, super picky. And I will explain to the intern that I'm doing that on purpose because I care about their work and I want their work to be incredibly impressive. You are responsible for your apprentice's understanding. Okay? I am responsible for the information all the way until it gets inside someone else's head. Not just that I said it, but that I know that they understood it, that I said it in a way that they could receive, right? It means sometimes I have to find a new way to explain something. Sometimes I have to explain something more than once and keep trying different ways until I find the way that makes sense to my apprentice. So I try to focus really closely on how my apprentice learns, right? Is that reading? Do they like documentation? Do they need to be hands-on? Do they like when things are explained in easy to understand analogies? Do they like watching videos? Do they like watching you work, right? Cater to their learning style and figure out how you're going to make this thing actually make sense. It's not just that you said it, it's that they understood it, okay? And then sometimes I am just not the right person to explain something. Either I don't know it well enough to teach it, that's a real thing, or sometimes I'm just not the right communicator with my apprentice about a particular topic. And that's when I phone a friend. So if I'm in the middle of explaining something and I'm like, this is not working, right? I call my coworker Kevin and I'm like, Kevin, I can't do dot reduce in Java, in JavaScript. It's just not my specialty. Can you please explain this thing to this person, right? It's okay to bring in another person to help make sure that something actually clicks with your apprentice, but you are responsible for your apprentice's understanding. Okay. We've talked a lot about the how of being an extreme mentor. I want to talk a little bit about the why. Okay. So why do we do this? Well, one, you get to shape someone into the kind of engineer that you want on your team, right? My mentors have made me into the kind of engineer that they want to work with. So they put in that investment, and now they have an engineer who operates the way that they want an engineer to operate, okay? When I got my first job working in restaurants, I didn't have any experience, obviously, in restaurants, and I got hired specifically because I didn't have that experience. My manager said, I see your potential, and I know that I can mold you into the employee that I want you to be without worrying that you have bad habits that you've picked up somewhere else. So when we apply this sort of mentorship to someone, especially someone who's really brand new, we get to shape someone into the kind of engineer that we want as a teammate. Okay? In this kind of mentorship, working with ADA interns, you are being given a rare opportunity to directly change someone's life. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I swear to you, this is my alarm goes off and I jump out of bed because of this sentence. I have the opportunity to directly change someone's life. This is not something that you get every single day, okay? Many of our ADA interns have children. And so I think about that impact as well, that not only am I helping this one person make a career change, find financial stability in this industry, I am making a generational impact to their children, changing the lives of those children as well, right? This work is a rare opportunity to directly change someone's life and make generational change in someone's family. And then lastly, you are being given a rare opportunity to directly change tech. Still, 85% of software engineers at Amazon are men, right? You, with this work, are helping to fix that. So I know that this work is hard. Come back to that why, right? You are directly changing someone's life and you are directly changing tech with this work.